Championship week here, week 17. And if you need a Snickers, well, don't make that rookie mistake. Maybe you need a Snickers. Let's take a look at the waiver wire options here for week 17 as the players that you could be looking to find some injury replacements or just maybe enhance your lineup because it's win at all costs. That's all that matters right now in your fantasy leagues. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. Let's talk about some waiver wire options here for the final week for most of you in your fantasy league. Some of you are crazy enough to play into week 18, and we'll be here to support you, but this is the big moment for a lot of you. So let's start with the quarterbacks and the injuries that we're looking at. We'll start with the running backs and the injuries that we're looking at there. That's the biggest priority right now. Josh Jacobs, dealing with that quad injury, may return in week 17. Isaiah Pacheco got a concussion on Monday, so that's bad for him to potentially play on Sunday. Brian Robinson Jr. has missed the last 2 games. Ramondre Stevenson's been out for the last 3 games. And we'll see about some of these other injured running backs. Deontay Foreman and Chris Rodriguez could be very prominent for some of the backups on their respective teams. You got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Zamir White, Khalil Herbert as the 3 biggest priorities no matter what the position is because they all 3 could be potential starters for you. So Dave, in terms of Edwards-Helaire, Jerick McKinnon's on IR and Pacheco's in the concussion protocol against a Bengals team that could be very, very easy to run on since they lost DJ Reader the last 2 weeks.
They've been very easy to run on. Ty Chandler at 24.7 PPR points against them. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren combined for just over 24 PPR points. If there's no Isaiah Pacheco, you're looking at the man who's going to have pretty much every single touch in the Kansas City Chiefs backfield. That used to be a great thing. Now it's just like a good thing, but the matchup is outstanding. Would absolutely love to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire in my lineup in week 17. The fantasy championships, everything's upside down, but he's an RB2 and you can go and get him off the waiver wire. It's great.
Borderline number 1 running back for me. Love the setup for him if he is the number 1 show in town. And for Zamir White, look, Josh Jacobs was close to playing Monday for the Raiders, so just keep that in mind. But White has been fantastic, at least 14.5 PPR points each of his last 2 games starting for Jacobs, and another favorable matchup against the Colts. They've really fallen apart, even with Grover Stewart coming back. You've seen a lot of teams have success running on them. So Zamir White just behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a good number 2 running back for this week. Injuries at the quarterback position that you're looking at here. We got a couple prominent ones in terms of Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud. Brock Purdy should be able to play. Stroud hopefully will be able to play, missed the last 2 games of the concussion, and Lawrence trending in the right direction, although according to Doug Peterson on Monday, don't expect him to practice on Wednesday, but we know what Trevor Lawrence has done. Every time he's been hurt, he's been able to make his following start. The quarterbacks to add for this week. This is an interesting list, Dave, because the top 3 guys, really Tyrod Taylor and Mason Rudolph, are going to be super flex and 2 quarterback options. But Flacco, Mullins, and Carr, you may have used them to advance to your championship round. Flacco and Carr coming off 30-point performances. Mullins coming off a 20-point game despite throwing for 400 yards. There are 4 receptions in the loss against the Lions. Who's your favorite of that trio?
My favorite is Derek Carr. He has at least 26 fantasy points in each of his past 2 games. This Tampa Bay pass defense has been a great matchup all year long. We saw a couple weeks ago, Desmond Ridder had over 20 fantasy points, Jordan Love over 20. If you could combine the Jaguars quarterbacks together, they threw 2 touchdowns against this defense. Derek Carr's been throwing the ball a lot. I expect it to continue. He's the one that I would go for first.
I would go with Mullins first just because I think the matchup is the best for him. The Packers have been absolutely abysmal. They've given up over 60 fantasy points, the last 2 weeks to Baker Mayfield and to Bryce Young. And Mullins has thrown a lot and over 400 yards passing last week. I think can get the job done again, even without Jordan Addison potentially and TJ Hawkinson. The wide receiver injuries as we transition to that position. Lots of guys that could be out. Waddle, Addison, Sutton may not play. Keenan Allen missed the last 2 games. Same with Jamar Chase missing last week's game. Pittman, a surprise absence last week. And you see the Packers, they're a mess. Marquise Brown also dealing with a heel injury. So the wide receiver replacements that you could be looking at here, there are some names that could help you, more so in 3 receiver leagues than 2 receiver leagues. But Rashid Shaheed, Demarcus Robinson, they're coming off strong performances. Robinson scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. DJ Chark coming off a huge game and gets the revenge game this week against the Jaguars. Last time he had a revenge game was early this season against the Lions, scored a touchdown in that game. KJ Osborne could be the number 2 receiver for the Vikings. And then more some of the desperation replacement plays. Dortch stepping in for Marquise Brown. Every time he gets 4 targets, he's successful. Cedric Wilson could be stepping in for Jalen Waddle. Slayton gets Tyrod Taylor, scored a 69-yard touchdown with him. And then Bo Melton and the Broncos guys replacing some of the injured players on their respective teams. But Dave, in terms of Rashid Shaheed, Demarcus Robinson, you said you like Derek Carr. Obviously, Robinson's been great. Take me through Shaheed after the big performance he had last week against the Rams.
I expect the passing to continue for New Orleans. Like I talked about, that matchup against Tampa Bay, very favorable. And I know Chris Olave is going to get his, but Rashid Shaheed is that perfect type of boom bust flex. And we could say that about a lot of the guys that you talked about, including Demarcus Robinson. He's on that list too. But I just love the opportunity that should be. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game between the Bucs and the Saints. I'm going to want pieces of that, so Shaheed's my favorite.
And for Robinson, he's got 2 games in his last 4 with at least 6 targets. So it's not like he's just scoring touchdowns, despite the fact that Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are on the field with Matthew Stafford. Stafford's just locked in right now, and this Giants secondary a little bit beat up. So Robinson could be a good number 3 wide receiver again, hopefully scores for the 5th time in a row. The tight ends that we're looking at here, you got the injuries to TJ Hawkinson's the big one. Hopefully he's going to be okay, but not necessarily the most promising situation after he left the game against the Lions. Cole Kmet also leaving the game against the Cardinals, and Hunter Henry missed last week's game. Could come back and be a good option for Bailey Zappi. Tight ends to add for this week, it's actually a pretty good list. You got Darren Waller, not exactly producing at a high level, but the Rams have been awful against opposing tight ends. Gerald Everett has been 8 PPR points or more in 5 straight games. Hopefully keeps that one going as well. Tucker Kraft has been good. Josh Oliver, good replacement option. Kyler Granson as well. And then Juwan Johnson should be added to this list also. So, Dave, who's your favorite of the guys listed here?
Waller has to be the favorite. He's got Tyrod Taylor as his new quarterback. We've seen it this year already. He's got a 25% target share anytime Tyrod Taylor's on the field. I would expect that to continue. They nearly hooked up for a big play last week against Philadelphia. The matchup is very favorable for them against that Rams secondary.
All right, in terms of, somebody like Gerald Everett, for example, Keenan Allen has been out, so just keep that in mind, but it's a good matchup for him as they take on the Broncos. We've seen, this defense been top 3 all season long in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends, so he's in a good spot. And then in terms of Tucker Kraft, he's got 10 PPR points or more in 3 straight games. You have the Packers dealing with several injuries at the wide receiver spot. Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks all either not playing or leaving last week's game. So just keep an eye on Tucker Kraft, but also keep an eye on Luke Musgrave, who could come back after dealing with the lacerated his abdomen injury that he missed the last 4 games with. So just something to keep in mind there. All right, we have you covered on our Fantasy Football Today podcast. We know it's a big week, Fantasy Championship week, so we want to make sure you have those lineups locked in, ready to go. We went through our waiver wire ads on Tuesday, and we're going to get you the starts and sits you need on Thursday and Friday. Always have some fun on Wednesday as well. And don't forget, once the regular season ends, we have you covered in the fantasy playoffs, and we have you covered looking ahead to next year. The Fantasy Football Today podcast, the best podcast in the business.